What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. First of all, happy Mario Odyssey Day, or I guess Assassin's Creed Origins Day, or Wolfenstein 2 Day, although I think it's pretty clear today seems to be all about Mario Odyssey all over the internet. It was the same way yesterday when the reviews came out, which we're about to talk about, and it's been like that all day today. So if you're looking forward to Mario Odyssey, you're probably really excited, but don't sleep on the other two, specifically Wolfenstein 2. But let's get started today because there are quite a few topics here. So reviews in general were all over the place yesterday for Mario Odyssey, and there were some ones that were a little out there personally, I think. For example, there was one that was done by independent.ie that gave Mario Odyssey a 6 out of 5. That somehow that makes sense. Again, review scores, I'm not a fan of them. I understand their purpose. People do get a quick take from them, but we kind of really perceive these values differently. Some people say a 7 out of 10 is a good score. Others say it's 9 out of 10 or bust. Either way, Mario Odyssey currently sits at a 97 on Metacritic. In fact, earlier yesterday morning when I went on Metacritic, well, it was down. It was really struggling. I think a lot of traffic was hitting that site, specifically because Wolfenstein 2, Assassin's Creed Origins, and Mario Odyssey all went up kind of at the same time. The embargoes, I think, lifted on all of them around, really around 8 a.m. that morning, 9 a.m., so they were everywhere. Wolfenstein 2, also a well-reviewed game, 90 on Metacritic. Assassin's Creed Origins, a little lower, around 84 right now as of this recording. But I think either way, you can't go wrong with any of the three. Now, Mario Odyssey is making a case to be another game that's up there along with Zelda for Game of the Year. We're seeing like perfect scores, 10 out of 10s, 95 out of 100, even some that's just straight up 100 out of 100. So this game is going to be there competing with what looks to be Zelda, Horizon Zero Dawn, and then maybe a few others like Persona 5 that kind of pop up with an awesome story. That will be right there at the end, fighting it out for Game of the Year, pretty much with all publications, then of course, places like the award show. But again, before we move on, don't sleep on something like Wolfenstein 2 getting great reviews, and they've done something that everyone's been really complaining about other companies for. They forewent the entire microtransaction loot box craze that seems to be going around right now, the big fad, and they didn't try to force in multiplayer into the game. In fact, they said specifically it would actually dilute the single player experience that we're trying to build here if we spent time kind of shoehorning in multiplayer. They made a game that has a start and a finish, and it is a big narrative-driven single-player game, something people are very worried about disappearing. So at this point, if you're thinking about, maybe you're on the fence for Wolfenstein 2, you're not sure if it's going to be worth your time, yeah, I would pick it up just because, if anything, it will show that there is still that audience for a straight-up single-player game that people are really scared about leaving. Now, I do think they are very clever here because, of course, they're going to technically get 2 launches out of this game. They're going to launch, well, today for PC, Xbox One, and PS4, and then they will have another launch next year to a larger Switch audience that I think will receive that game well. I think a lot of people will buy it on the Switch, and I think people like myself and others will buy it again. I probably will look into buying it again on the Switch just because of the portable nature and the fact that I'll be curious to see how they get that engine running on the Switch. I think they'll just have the frame rate much like they did with Doom and get pretty much the same looking experience. Now, along with the embargo lifting for Mario Odyssey reviews, Digital Foundry also did their usual tech analysis where they kind of looked at the game and tried to figure out different things like resolution and tricks that they're using, as well as attention to detail, which apparently Mario Odyssey has a ton of attention to detail. Things like rolling down hills will put dirt on your clothes and you jump into the water and it washes them off. He'll be shivering in cold areas. We already kind of knew that. He'll be fanning himself in hot areas. But the idea here is, well, Nintendo brought a lot of attention to detail to this game, which is something that a lot of gamers appreciate, especially because you'll maybe sometimes just discover this kind of stuff. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of stuff to discover in Mario Odyssey, but they also went ahead and showed us differences in resolution. For one, it is a 900p game. I know there was a lot of speculation flying around this past week about it possibly being 1080p. It's pretty clear it's just upscaled 1080p, and 900p is the standard resolution, and it is dynamic, so it will change. According to Eurogamer and Digital Foundry, the more common resolution that it will drop to is not 720p, it's actually 810p, which I know is odd, right? But that seems to be the more common one they'll drop to rather than dropping all the way down to 720p when in docked mode. So they at least had some optimization there, but it's very clear 60 frames per second was the goal here. It was 60 frames or bust for them, and they did it. They made it work. There are some parts where it does seem to stutter or drop a little bit, but it's not massive. Like, they're not dropping into like the 30s or anything. And Eurogamer and Digital Foundry did show that. Places in New Donk City, for example, which makes sense, there's a lot going on in there, did tend to drop at times. Down to like the 40s was like the worst they seem to be able to find. And then different parts, like for example, wooded areas seem to also drop the frame rate briefly. It wasn't long. It was certainly a dip in their videos, but then it came right back up. But overall, the game seems to look great. Their tech analysis shows even smaller things like changes in frame rate for animations on different characters, or when you're in New Donk City, if you're far away, you'll see the animations slowly drop down to even 20 frames per second for like different people walking around New Donk City would then start to kind of move at 20 frames per second well off in the distance. Little tricks they use to keep the frame rate pretty much locked at most times at 60 frames per second. Overall, it seemed like they had nothing but good things to say about it, and it is pretty impressive to have a game like that fully featured on a handheld system. I will say very quickly, I really appreciate Nintendo's drive for 60 frames per second games over having like 30 frames per second and a very pretty looking game. It's still a good looking game, but I do think if they dropped it down to 30 frames per second straight up, they probably could have gotten 1080p native on the Switch, but they opted to drop resolution in lieu of frame rate. That's something I appreciate here. You have to make sacrifices and compromises, and they decided, hey, you know, we want a 60 frames per second experience. Very important in some of these platformers. Now, Mario Sunshine was 30 frames. That still played well enough, but I do understand the want for 60 frames per second because you get a much more responsive game, and Mario does nothing but benefit from those extra frames. Next up, we had a new video card announced yesterday, the Nvidia GTX 1070 Ti. Yes, that's right. They're doing this weird thing where they're filling in a gap that really didn't need to be filled in. The 1070 was, I think, strong enough, but they're bringing in the 1070 Ti for an interesting price. It's going to be $450, and based on a lot of projections based on its specs, it's looking like it's going to come close to 1080 but fall short, which has people wondering, why wouldn't you spend the extra money and get the 1080? I believe the 1080 currently from a lot of MSRPs I see floating around are $550, so it's about a $100 difference. I have seen places where you can get it also for $500, which is about a $50 difference, but we all know how video cards are. They fluctuate massively because of the cryptocurrency, really the cryptocurrency craze that's going on where you use video cards. AMD cards seem to be better to use, but I do see just any video card in general go well above its MSRP. And in this case, maybe Nvidia wanted to release another card to have for the holiday season and also give something new for people who do, I guess, crypto mining, another video card for them to buy. Because at this point, if I'm a video card developer and I release these cards, I understand there is an audience that will just spend massive amounts of money buying like 6 of these cards at a time. So you're just leaving money on the table, not producing a yearly iteration of your card. And of course, they did bring out the 1080 Ti, so why not? Put another Ti out, I guess. Is it worth the money? If you already have a 1070, no. If you already have a 1060, I mean, look at it, but at this point, maybe wait for Volta or save up the extra money and spend it on just a regular 1080 because, well, you'll get better performance anyway. Next up, let's briefly talk about the number of games on the Switch. If you don't know, there are a lot of people who are kind of running around saying the Switch has no games at all. There's just no games on the system. People are starved for games. And then there's really an eShop listing that comes out, and then we find out that when you really look at it, you can go through the eShop, there are over 200 games. It's currently sitting at 202 games that are available for the Switch, which is pretty good considering I know Nintendo was talking about how there were 80 to 100 games in development, and now it's sitting at 202 games, which I do think has a lot to do because of the indie games that really came over. Now that the Switch has really turned into an indie game machine, it's going to quickly rise in games because we see so many indie developers bringing over these games that don't take super long to move over to the Switch, and sometimes we see them just pop up almost overnight. There's so many games that like get announced and then they give us a date that's like, hey, it's coming out next week. So they're piling on there very quickly. I think this is a great strategy for Nintendo, by the way, to really front load a lot of their games on there, especially indie games, because then it gives them time to develop their first party games where it's this big release. And of course, the bigger the library, the more chance you have to bring people over who like a certain genre of game. So no, it doesn't appear that Switch gamers are starved for games, and it looks like the library is going to continue building because Nintendo has said nothing but, hey, we're going to be continuing this launch lineup, how it's just massive the first what, 7-8 months. Expect them to continue that going forward, as they have said that, well, these steady releases need to continue if the Switch is going to be successful, and they seem to know that. Next up, let's talk about the Xbox and Microsoft. Now, Microsoft has, at this point, from what we can see online, sent out review systems to different organizations. The Xbox One X has been sent to, I've seen a bunch of places, I think IGN, GameSpot, Eurogamer, anyone you could think of with the bigger sites should have one by now. We've seen unboxings all over the place, and the one to really look for is Digital Foundry, because they will start doing their different tests and really show us how things are different from the regular Xbox One S and the Xbox One, and give us an idea of how much stronger it is. Of course, they will also compare it to things like the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 4 Pro. I'm not really sure what the other places are going to do, since it's kind of hard to pick out the differences unless you have stuff like how Digital Foundry does, where they can do frame rate analysis, they can check out basically every pixel around and figure out all different types of resolutions. Again, the other places, I guess, will just show us some side-by-side comparisons, but really definitely the place to follow for this information that will be more in-depth is definitely Digital Foundry and Eurogamer. And then in our last bit of news, Microsoft released their financials for their first fiscal year quarter, which is the period between July and September. So we have information about how they did in that period, and while the overall company is doing really well, as they usually do, because, well, Windows and Office 365 and servers and everything outside of gaming pretty much makes money for them. And then we kind of move over to gaming, and there's been pretty much no growth at all. So here's a slide here where you will see the gaming, which is under the gaming tab. This is for more personal computing, more of their highlights for part of their businesses. And you'll see here gaming revenue grew 1%. And the biggest thing to take away from here is hardware sales are definitely down more so than you'd think, since it evened out a 21% growth from software and services. The hardware basically took that 21% and pretty much dragged it down, as the hardware revenue that they are not really telling us here was enough to completely offset that. Now, their Xbox Live monthly active users also grew 13% from last year's quarter, although from the previous quarter that's more current this year, so the end of fiscal year 17, there was pretty much no growth at all. But what's big to take away from here is it looks like they are all in on the Xbox One X. The fact that they announced it so long ago is definitely affecting sales right now, especially right now as we get closer to this big Xbox One X release. In fact, they think that the Xbox One X will heavily drive hardware going into holiday season and then into next year. So they are heavily relying on this Xbox One X, which is a pretty expensive system, to help push them forward and make their hardware pretty much grow, which it will. Their Xbox One X will help them grow this fiscal year quarter coming up compared to last year, because even last year we knew about the Xbox One X, well, the Scorpio at the time, but we knew something was coming. So there's a good chance people were just pushing off, oh, maybe I'll get it later when that new system comes out. I won't get the S or the Xbox One right now. I think it has more of an effect as we get closer to it, because a lot of people are probably looking at those systems in stores. They're like $250 or $300, and they're like, I'll wait, I'll save, I'll spend an extra $200 and get the X because I have a 4K TV, or I'm planning on getting a 4K TV this Christmas. Microsoft, it looks like, has no problem pretty much throwing away the past year in terms of MPD charts or anything like that, because they believe the X is going to give them that big step up in terms of hardware revenue. So it's going to be extremely interesting this Christmas to track the Xbox One X and see how it does, because eventually they have to show up with these reports again, and they're going to have to tell us how well it actually did. And then, of course, we'll get MPD results and everything. I don't think Media Create's going to tell much of a story if they released a couple of them there. It's definitely going to be more about Europe and definitely the US. So we'll have to keep an eye on this. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for Newswave. Make sure you comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Definitely let me know what you think about Mario Odyssey. Have you had a chance to play it? Do you like it? Or are you looking forward to getting it down the road? Also, let me know what you think about the Xbox One, the Xbox One X. Do you think Microsoft was smart announcing it so long ago and seemingly not really caring that their hardware has been pretty much declining ever since? I guess they expect it to jump up heavily when the X comes out. Not only do they think the X is going to sell, they think the S will be selling along with it. Let me know your thoughts on that entire situation. Guys, have a good weekend. Play some games, whether it's Wolfenstein, Assassin's Creed, or Mario or something else. Have some fun, guys. I'll see you on Monday.